In the last few years, it seems like everybody's fallen back in love with their old childhood consoles, like the Mega Drive 2 we have here. The first problem people find out is when they take them out of storage and try to plug them into modern TVs, you have things like this, composite cables. And even if your TV has composite input, half the time it won't work because of a strange 15Hz signal. For this reason, I've invented mods that allow you to upgrade your consoles to work on more modern equipment. A really popular way, instead of HDMI, is to add RGB. These can then go into CRTs if you wanted to go proper old school, or you can run them through things like an OSSC or RetroTink to get to HDMI. So the RGB mods are usually more popular than HDMI. Let me show you how to install the CleanRGB and get the best possible signal out of this console. So the first thing we want to do is get this powered up. That will need, at the minute, just the composite cable plugging in with the yellow, white and red. This one's got a clean power mod, so we have USB-C power. And then if we pull up the overlay and turn on, let's just see if we get anything on screen. And we can see there we have Sega. Now the colour's all messed up, but that can happen in the old consoles. So this could be part of the composite and we don't really care about that. If we're going to do RGB, we'll bypass that issue. So we know the console's generally working. Let's take this apart and disconnect all these cables first. And then this one's already been taken apart and had some work done on it. So it's already had capacitors done, the clean power done. We just need to do the RGB mod. I'll just remove this out of the shell for now. Put this to one side. And we just want to work on the board. And what we're going to need is this CleanRGB board. And if you want this mod, you can go to retro6.co.uk. You can either search for it by clicking the search bar here and typing CleanRGB. And it brings it up here. And then we sell the CleanRGB SCART cables for several consoles as well. Or you can go to mods and parts and select whichever console you like. Now the CleanRGB is universal, so it works on many consoles. So you might not find it in certain sections, but you should find it in all the ones it works for. So if we go to Mega Drive, you can see it's available here. So all we're going to need for this is the mod itself, some wire, and the console. Now there is a guide on retro6.wiki. If you go to the wiki, and then at the top there's this universal CleanRGB guide, which tells you the basics of how this mod works and how you install it. And you'll see on here we have like Master System, SNES. We don't have one for the Mega Drive 2. So once you know the principle, it's easy, but that's kind of the point of these videos, to walk you through how to do it on any console. So we won't follow this specifically, I'll just guide you through it now. And what we want on this is the chip responsible for the RGB. And on the AV port, we want to output the RGB signals to here. So this is going to involve looking at the schematic and figuring out how we do this. If we take a look at the schematic for the Mega Drive 2, we can see the chip here, IC11, has the red, green, blue and sync coming in on pins 2, 3, 4 and 10, going out to the AV port on pins 23, 2, 1, and the sync is connected up, around and down to sync in. So sync in is already connected, we shouldn't need to touch that, but we want to redo the RGB signals. That will mean we can either lift the pins off here or leave them connected. It doesn't really make much difference. But on the output, we definitely want to lift the pins and then resolder to the traces. That means this is the chip we're working with. And we want pins 2, 3 and 4 over here connecting. Pins 10 further down connecting. And then the top pins here lifting up to solder wires to. That can all be self-contained. So we just need to find a good spot now for this to be able to solder to here. So I'm thinking maybe over here. So if we propose that and get the shell, and on the top side we actually have this cage that goes on first. So we can see if we hover that over, this is going to be in the way, but that can easily be bent up and flattened so it's not completely removed. And I think if we did that, this would fit. So if we just bend that up, flatten that out, it's then a non-destructive method. And we can see there this would fit fine without any interference. So I think I'm going to go for that as the connector. Maybe this way around, it doesn't really matter. this way around. No, we'll just keep it how it was. So we'll go for that there. I'm just going to secure it down with some double-sided tape so it doesn't move. And actually, I forgot I already included it as part of the actual board. I'll give you some setup basics, and I actually put double-sided tape on by default, so you don't need to find any extra. Only do this once you're happy with the position, but I am. So we're going to go with right there for now. That allows us to now work with this and start adding the wires. The wire I'll be using is just enamel wire. So this is 0.2mm enamel wire. You can also use anything else. We've got some 30 AWG Kynar wire, which is slightly more common, but I like to use the enamel. I'll start on the chip over here and we'll solder to pins 2, 3 and 4. And the first thing I do is blob some solder on the tip of the iron, insert the wire into that solder blob and let it melt away to expose the enamel, or to remove the enamel. Put some flux over the chip, and then I'll just put some fresh solder on the pins first before we attach the wires. And now it's just a case of tacking them wires down like so. Positioning the wire over the red input, which is this one here, and just cut the wire with a scalpel. Then we want to do the same on this end of the wire, just a blob of solder. Touch the end into the wire, and we're left with the exposed copper wire. And then we simply solder this to the pad. And repeat for each one. So we have the red here, the green here, the blue here, and pin 10, which will be this one here. So we have red, green, blue and sync all going in. Now we can bypass the sync, which we'll probably do for now, because it already passes straight over to the AV port. So let's just leave sync off in this case. However, passing it through this gives us more control. We'll see if it's needed once we're done. And there we have now the red, green and blue pins going to the red, green and blue inputs. We need to connect ground and 5 volts. If the system's outputting more than 5 volts, pass it through this over 5 volt symbol here. It'll go through this regulator and drop it down to under 5 volts. So for our needs, we need a ground and a 5 volt wire. If you look up the datasheet of the MB3514, ground is here and VCC 5 volts is this 12 pin here. So we need another wire from here and here going to ground and 5 volts. And that now has the ground and 5 volts going to ground and 5 volts. The last thing to do is send the red, green and blue out here to the red, green and blue pins on here. And double checking the schematic, the red, green and blue out go 23, 22, 21. And it's a 24 pin chip, so we want to lift this pin, this pin and this pin. Or if you don't want to lift pins, you can see the traces quite clearly going to these 3 here. So you can either cut these 3 traces and solder to these 3 pads, or we can lift these 3 pins up. I'll go for the lift up method. And the best way I find to do this is get a set of tweezers, break it in half, and bend the tip like this. So what we can do is get the soldering iron warming up, and hook this bent end under the leg here, and sort of do an action like this, sort of twisting up like that as we warm up. We'll want some flux while we're doing this, so cover that in flux. Get the tweezers ready. You want to hook behind the pins like this and warm up. And as it's warm, we can gently go under the pin like that. So now that can be freely lifted up higher. And now we've got access to the other 2 pins, which makes it even easier. That's that pin up. And the last one here. And there we go. So you've got clear space under all 3 now. And from a different angle, you can see there, the pins are clearly separated from the traces. So now the final step is we want to solder our wires to these 3 pads below and leave these just floating in midair. So these could be bent right the way out the way if you wanted. And we want to attach the red here, blue here, green here. These traces then go off to these pins here and to the AV port. And that's now the red, green and blue soldered in. So these are underneath these pins, and these pins are in the air and go into red, green and blue. This now should fully work, and all we've got to do is tune these dials to suit, and let's see how we do that. There's also potentially a way, if you didn't want to lift pins, you could remove this entire chip completely and then solder these 3 wires to the pads here and these 3 wires to the pads here, but we might have to alter audio. So if we just check the schematic, audio left and right come here, go down into all these through. So actually audio isn't used here, you can see in and out isn't used. So you could just remove this chip completely. This is not going to be used. And instead of lifting those pads, we could just remove this chip. But in case the customer wants to revert this, we've left this chip in place. Now let's move on to the actual work involved in tuning this chip. You'll need an oscilloscope to tune these, but I can do this work for you on specific consoles like this Mega Drive 2. And then after that, all you have to do is turn these potentiometers to the exact positions that I set them to, and you won't need the oscilloscope. One thing you will need is the SCART RGB cable. We're making these, so we don't currently make the Mega Drive 2 one, but any generic SCART lead for now will do. So a Mega Drive 2 SCART lead. This end goes into the console's port, just like before. And this side now can go to the CRT with a SCART connected, an OSSC, a RetroTink, anything you like. I'm going to plug this into our OSSC. We'll then also need USB power in this case, so we can power up the console. We've got a game, and then I'm going to have to probe these with an oscilloscope now. With my probe connected, I'm going to turn on the console, and I'm going to probe the red in to start with. So if we turn that on, and we take a look at the video signal. First, we want to change these divisions down to about 10 micro. And we can see here now, this is the signal. So this is what we want to tune. RGB in comes in, so this is the native signal. But what we are ultimately interested in is these dots here, these final output stages. So red, green, blue, and sync if we were doing that. These want to end up at 1.4 volts, these final pins here. So what we first want to do is remove the DC offset by probing these DC offset pins here. So let's do that first. We'll probe the DC offset here, and the kit comes with a screwdriver, so you can just now turn this DC offset dial here. And as we do that, we want this line here, this bottom line we see here, wants to come right down to the 0 volt here. So as we turn this dial, you can see clockwise starts bringing it down. So you bring it down. Now you don't want to go past the 0 volts because you'll be clipping data, but you want it to be as close to on as possible. So if we just change the scale down to 5 volts to get closer, we can maybe also filter this signal slightly so we're not looking at as much noise. There we go. And what we're looking at is getting this remaining little bit here dropped to as close as here as we can. Let's just see if we can tune that last little bit by turning the dial slightly more. And I always like to leave it just that little bit off 0 so we know we're not clipping anything. If we probe the green and do exactly the same, turn this dial to bring green right the way down to the 0 volt. There we go. And again for the blue. And in theory, these should all end up being the same position. So once you've tuned one, the others should all tune into position. That's the 3 done there. Once you've done those 3, you can really jump straight to the final stage. So if we go straight to now the red's final stage, you can see what we're looking at is a hugely overscaled signal. This should be from ground. There will be an offset because the way this circuit works is it offsets by 0.2 to 0.3 volts for the sync tip, so there's no underswing on black. And from here, it should then go up to 1.4. So it should come to exactly here, which the gap you can see is 1.4. Now the way we do that is we turn the other 2 dials, which are labeled divide and gain. So if the signal's too strong, like it is in this case, we want to divide it down. The gain is already set from factory to 0, so we don't need to increase that unless it's under voltage, which is very rare. So we want to turn this div now, this divide, down to reduce this signal that we're seeing here to fall within this line. So we will just get the screwdriver in here and divide down until it falls within. For this, so you can see more, we can increase the time to a lot more. I think that game's actually crashed as well. Let's just reset the console. There we go. So now we can turn this dial to fine tune the tips there, and you can see this can be done by eye on this overall signal, and then we can also pause the waveform and look at specific sections zoomed in, and you can see there we are pretty much bang on the line. With that done, we just have to probe the other signals. So we'll go to the green, and the same idea, turn this dial until the signal is hitting just under the 2 volts, like so. And the final one will be the blue. And there we have us close to perfect for now. If we disconnect the probe, and you can actually see we have the gain is all turned off on all 3. The DC offset is completely different on green and blue for all 3. So we might find that we want to tweak these after because they should all match. And then the divide is at the bottom on all 3. So the divide's right, the voltage scale's right, but these offsets are different. So next up, let's just see if this outputs anything to our video signal. So let's just enable our capture overlay, turn on, and there we go. So we're now seeing something. Let's just restart that because I don't think that's quite right. And look at that very blue output signal. So it's not quite balanced right. I'm pretty sure that should be white. And that means we've probably clipped something. But a better way is to use a flash cart loaded up with 240p test suite so that we can get a white screen, which is what we need. So we power this up. We can see now we're in the menu. And if we just connect a controller, this is the correct way to tune. So instead of guessing based on the game's video output, which might not be pure white, and that's likely what's happened, if we now load into 240p test suite, and what we'll do is go to video tests, and we can get, say, just coloured screens. So there'll be, in fact, I think it is test patterns, and then white and RGB screens. This should be pure white now. So all we need to do is connect up the oscilloscope again, and let's just probe the red, green and blue outputs. So we can see that one lands at where we expect. Green, you can see, however, look at this massive gap here. We've lost some of the green, it's too high up. And the blue's even higher. So you can see that issue has come about because when we've done this test, we've done it with a game which isn't showing a pure white screen, so we've made the wrong assumption. So let's just go back through and do exactly what we did before, which is to probe the DC offset here and check that's correct. So we'll just move the DC offset back up a little bit to lift it off ground and then bring it back down. So we're doing exactly what we've just done, but now with a correct pure white screen. Now you can see on there the green is way above 0. So we can obviously now move that down to beyond 0. Same for the blue. Let's probe here. And blue is way, way up. So we'll bring that all the way down to 0. Now if we take a look at them DC offsets, you can see these are much closer to each other. And now when we take a look at the screen, that's now pure white. There's the red, there's the green, there's the blue. So you can see we now have perfect levels there, all balanced out. And if we go back and let's take a look at the screen in general. So you can see this is nice and clean. We can go through all video tests, but instead of that, let's just pop Sonic in. And let's see an actual game running, as opposed just the test cart. And there we go, that's how Sonic should look. So, nice and clean. And good RGB. So let's just review what we've done here then. Now we know and we're happy that this has all worked. Let's just take a look at what we did on this install. And we can also lightly tweak these settings back now, I think. So I don't think that tiny movement will make a huge difference to the output. And they should in theory all balance. So they look like there's a good balance between them. And what you'll notice as well, if I spin this, take a look at the colour on screen. See how you can change the colour tone? So if you want it redder, you can tune it. If you want it less, you can do that. So if your monitor specifically has, say, some colour shift in it, you can use the CleanRGB to compensate for your own monitor's colour shift in colour balance. So that's another benefit of having this kind of dial setup. Yes, it's a bit more work to configure, but it's ultimately much more control. So let's just turn Sonic off a minute, clear that out of the way. And let me just explain now what's really going on in this install. We have, first you have to identify where the RGB signals are in the specific console you're modding. And you want to tap off the RGB inputs of any kind of encoder, go into the CleanRGB, and then come out and go to the AV port. Now that can involve cutting traces to isolate the AV port, or in this case, lifting pins. So it all depends on which console you're working on. Once you've done that, you provide it with power, and then finally you tune these dials, which normally just involves the DC offset and the divide. Now, as I mentioned, this is a one-time thing, so this is the first time I've actually done one in a Mega Drive 2 and videoed it. All the ones before I've not really bothered photographing, I've just installed them, and now we have this setup here. So what that means is if you want to install this in a Mega Drive 2 now, all you have to do is lift those 3 pins or remove the chip, solder the wires where you see them, and turn these dials to exactly this position that you see on screen. And that will be enough. That will then work as RGB output. And I'll put this on retro6.wiki. If you want your specific console modding, so we can do the work for you, you can go to Send in Services, Console Mods, and scroll down and go to the Mega Drive 2, and in there you have the option for the clean power that you've seen, as well as the CleanRGB. If you want it just ready-made, this is a section I'm now actively working on to start populating this with ready-made consoles. If you don't see something in here, just literally contact us. So you can either email us, you can scroll down and click this email, you can go to the Discord here, which takes you to our active Discord, just reach out there, or you can give us a call. If something isn't currently listed, we can certainly do it, and we can have every single console fully ready-made and specified exactly how you like. For example, a Dreamcast, you can have it with no controllers, no power, or you can have it modded with clean power, controllers. You can have region-free, HDMI mods, new shells. It's literally spec'd and built to order. And that's it for this one, guys. I hope that's made the CleanRGB a little bit easier to understand and how you set it up and install it. And if you don't have an oscilloscope, just simply follow along on retro6.wiki on the specific install guides for your consoles. Any questions, reach out to us. We love to hear what you guys think, and we're always after feedback, positive and negative. One of the main feedbacks we've had on this CleanRGB already is to make dedicated versions for, say, this Mega Drive 2 now. If we make a wire-free install that comes pre-configured, so there's no dials to turn, and it's just a drop-in install, it makes the process easier, but it's not universal. So the first one I made was the CleanRGB Universal, which is what you see here, and it allows you to install this in every console you could imagine. but making specific versions that drop into the consoles much easier is definitely beneficial. If you're interested in that, and maybe you even want to see it being made, definitely let me know. That's it for this one, and I'll catch you in the next.